ChatGPT, I mean, it shows us the power of parallel processing networks. I mean, we call it artificial intelligence, we call it deep learning, we call it natural language processing. But actually, it's all about a specific way of thinking that humans have and that you now build in machines as well. You can start as an assurance expert, but also as an executive, as a board member, as a CEO, as a CFO. You can start building the story. So it gives, working with PSI theory at the company level, gives you new insights and tells you which point you should target first to increase the overall maturity level of what I call an organizational personality.
That is wonderful. Welcome to the PowerMind channel, your go-to channel for meeting inspirational people. And today we have such an inspirational person here. It is my great pleasure to welcome Barbara Siegenthaler from Switzerland. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to talk about a really, really passionate topic, which is the innovation potential of an organization or company from a unique perspective, which is actually the personality systems interaction theory. And this theory is an area of scientific research on psychology, amongst others, but Barbara is going to tell us more about it, which can actually explain things in organizations in such a way that it gives you an entirely new perspective. So it's a really, really fascinating topic. But first of all, to introduce you, Barbara, you have a multifaceted background and rich background. Most importantly, you run your own think tank, which is Savantion. And you have a background, you are a lawyer. You are also an a certified internal auditor and a researcher in the field that I just outlined. And what we're going to talk about today is basically also your research findings on that unique perspective. But now, before we dive in, let's introduce you as a person first. Can you give us, first of all, an outlook on your inspirations? Who is your most inspiring person?
I'm in general impressed by people who are very smart, but also modest. And an ideal typical person who is modest and really smart is Professor Julius Kuhl, whose research results I use in a business context. So he's a professor emeritus in personality psychology. And I'm still astonished that he's my collaboration partner because I haven't studied psychology. I just decided at some point, it was back in 2015, I came across his research results and I was so fascinated by it that I contacted him and now have an expert qualification in PSI theory and started applying PSI theory in a different way, in a different context. And he...
So this professor is like the founder of that stream of research. Is that fair to say?
Yes, he created one of the most innovative, groundbreaking system theory in academic personality psychology. So he's a professor emeritus. He's 75 years old, and he published his key publication in 2001.
So that is, if you refer to PSI, that's that personality systems interaction theory, just for the viewers.
PSI theory by Professor Julius Kuhl.
Okay, and we will definitely link that because this, the more I find out about that theory, the more fascinated I am. And that is a nice lead over to what is your most inspirational book that you would recommend to the viewers?
So, as you told me before, I have it here with me. Guess what? It's this 1,200-page book. It's, oops, can you see it?
Motivation and Personality. And there we have it. It's
difficult to show it.
Yeah,
maybe.
If you put it,
like
now we can see it. Yeah, Interaction of Psychic Systems, Motivation and Personality by Julius Kuhl.
Exactly. And as you can see, I read it. It's close to breaking down. So I think about it as an ebook. So I think about scanning it at some point.
Ah, right.
So,
Okay. But it exists in other languages, right? You
no,
said to me?
German
No,
only.
it's in German only, but I think the articles, did you not mention that there are articles, research articles in English?
Exactly. Of
That we
course,
could link?
Professor Kuhl and his research team, they published a lot of English-speaking articles, including summary articles about the theory. But if you really want to go deep, you need to be a native German speaker.
All
So
right. Okay.
today, it hasn't been translated to English.
But maybe will in the future, because
I hope so. I told Professor Kuhl that I don't know how, I don't know when, but I absolutely have the intention that I will make this happen.
And the viewers will soon understand why, because it's really passionate and it can help us so much in our explanations of complex situations or complex systems. And we will link in, so maybe we can link in for the viewers like a summary article and also, of course, your research article, so that the viewers get, you know, a first impression. Now, final question to introduce you as a person. What is your most favorite tool, one tool that you cannot live without?
It depends, of course. I can't live without PSI theory. What sounds a little bit strange, but I really basically fell in love with the theory. Not with Professor Kuhl, but with kind of his brain. And but other tools besides PSI, I'm also fascinated by facilitation-related tools.
Mm-hmm.
So liberating structures, open spaces, bar camps, because it really activates the collective intelligence of people, and I'm fascinated by bringing knowledge and experience and brains together, and to see what happens when people open up in a relaxed context and they start sharing and recombining knowledge. So I'm very fascinated by these methodologies, because that's what they trigger, or what they
exactly. And what you're saying, I just want to underline, because if we can use frameworks and methodologies that actually can, you know, totally support that collective intelligence, is something so wonderful when you're in that situation to achieve that. So it's actually really worthwhile, not only that theory, but also these what you just said, frameworks of thinking that help us, because it's one of the things that I always underline also in my professional work. It's like it's not sufficient to just put people in a room and then wait and see what happens. You need perspectives, right?
Yes, it's I mean, liberating structures or bar camps. I mean, it's a structured process to help people get into a relaxed mood and share knowledge. Share knowledge. And that's what is fascinating about it.
And that's a precursor of innovation. And it's such a, if you can generate that kind of experience between people, I mean, as you said, share knowledge, or like collective intelligence, that is something really gold for any organization to have in today's world, right? So, okay,
yes, and
I will not.
It's also a key characteristic of a future viable company. If you want to be kind of future-proof, you need to have processes and structures and frameworks in place that draw upon the experience, knowledge of people, and the recombined collective experience, knowledge, and data. Exactly. Of people. Well, it's knowledge and experience from people, and then you combine it with data. But these are kind of the raw ingredients of not only of innovation, but also of a future viable company.
It's kind of the must-have thing for today's business world. Exactly.
Exactly. So and then, the next question is, of course, how do you get world-leading experience and knowledge? Where do you get the data from? And how do you make sure that it's actual, that it's broad, that it's relevant knowledge? And then it's all about recombining, reconnecting to synthesize something new. And that's at the core of innovation.
Exactly. And that leads us nicely into today's topic. It's like most companies today are looking for that competitive edge in terms of how can we be more innovative? How can we be more, into developing ourselves, growing? And I think what you are doing in your research and in the work that you do is exactly, it's giving you those keys, those instruments to tap into that. And you said some of the things already, but let's maybe start how we both met. And we met at the occasion of my book that was published last year. And let us just outline that it was actually one thing that I outlined in the book. It's a situation or context where you then said, hang on a minute, that can be explained with PSI theory. Mm-hmm. And it was basically this so-called how-to block that I described in my book, which describes a state of complete blocking or a collective block between people where they are actually totally aligned on the content, what they're about to work on, but they're not aligned on how to go about it. And you then said, okay, this is a fundamental thing. You need to distinguish between the content and the forms of thinking. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Because that is such a valuable perspective for me.
Exactly. So, I mean, it sounds very theoretical, talking about content of thinking, forms of thinking. And things don't get better if you say it in an easier way, maybe thinking forms, thinking content. At some point, I started to say that thinking content is what we think, and thinking forms is how we think. But still, it's kind of a little bit challenging to grasp it. So let's use some examples. For example, in a job ad. If a job ad says, we are looking for someone who has a master in engineering and 5+ years of working experience in a strategy consulting firm, for example, they try to make sure with these requirements that the person has the right knowledge and experience. And that's what the person thinks, that's thinking content. But job ads also include requirements such as we are looking for a proactive team player, or we want someone who strives for excellence. And that's forms of thinking. That's how the person thinks, independent of if the person has a master in engineering or in business or in teaching, doesn't really matter. So the first example was a job ad where you can see the differentiation between how and what we think, forms of thinking and content of thinking. Very well. The next example I'd like to use is actually ChatGPT. I don't know what about your LinkedIn feed. My LinkedIn feed is full of ChatGPT
exactly.
Related posts, including guidance on the prompts you should use. And ChatGPT, I mean, it shows us the power of parallel processing networks. I mean, we call it artificial intelligence, we call it deep learning, we call it natural language processing. But actually, it's all about a specific way of thinking that humans have and that we now build in machines as well. And when my twin boys, I have 14-year-old twin boys, when they were babies, I found a baby toy that I brought to this talk. So here it is.
Ah, yes. Great.
It's a baby toy from Manhattan Toys. It's called Squish. It's from the 80s. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was developed by a NASA engineer.
Oh, okay.
And it's a beautiful example of parallel processing. So it's kind of a network. It's a special way of thinking, and artificial intelligence, as well as our brain, we can think in a very interconnected way. And that's a structure, that's a pattern, that's a way of thinking.
And that's this form of thinking, right?
That's a form of thinking. And ChatGPT is amazing at this stuff, and it will get stronger and stronger in this kind of information processing. It's a way how information is processed.
Thanks for using that timely example, because it actually shows us how now artificial intelligence is kind of appropriating itself our forms of thinking, isn't it?
I would say we are building computer systems that now simulate a way how our brain can process information.
And that's so interesting that this happens.
The key characteristic of parallel processing networks.
Which is like, wow. I mean, just that we are able to talk about this now in 2023 is like a phenomenon. But I see your point. It's a nice way of explaining forms of thinking. Can you just say what for ChatGPT, just to finish that example, would be the content of thinking?
So I've not the toy with me, but a little book. It looks like a proper book. It's actually, I found it from a publishing house. It actually includes Post-its.
Ah.
But it's a very small book. Actually, I know the author or part of the authors. It's a book about legal disruption, disruption in the legal world. So this is knowledge. You can take a book as a metaphor for knowledge and experience.
So that,
but of course,
as an example for content.
In this book, they don't only talk about their knowledge and experience. They are thinking in a specific way
about the content. Yeah,
about the content. So I think these two elements are pretty good in saying forms of thinking and content of thinking, and you need both. And when I'm showing you this, it's very important for companies to understand that if they want to kind of influence the company or bring the company forward, they have two main areas where they can focus on. The first one is, do we have the right experience, knowledge, and do we have the data? And the second key question is, how does the organization tick? How do we think? And which kind of thinking preferences are embedded in our governance frameworks, in our enterprise risk management? Which kind of issues do internal audit find? What are the key risks?
And this is a nice example of how this distinction actually helps us to create clarity. First of all, to know what to focus on, but also to see that sometimes it's not the content as such that is maybe blocking us, or that might accelerate us. So this is a situation that I describe in my book. There might be the best experts in the world sitting around the table, but the actual thing that is blocking them is the how. That is my, the outset that is described. It's not the what, because they all have fascinating experience they bring to the table. Now, could you now, as a next question, make the link for the viewers, how you then can use this perspective on the forms and the content for innovation? Because you say actually that there is a certain content of thinking required for innovation and a certain form of thinking. So how can this distinction help us there to understand that better?
Okay. So what's really important is the raw ingredients of innovations is the content of thinking the company has access to. So the raw ingredients of innovation is the content of thinking, the what, the knowledge, the experience, the data the company has access to. Second very important statement is the content of thinking, the knowledge, the experience the company can leverage depends on how the organization ticks. So for example, a very, very easy example, if you do projects and something goes wrong and the company never looks at what went wrong, which is changing, represents a change in thinking preferences. So instead of thinking everything will be okay, you look at what really went wrong. And if you're not capable as an organization to look at this detail and learn from it and embed the learning into your overall knowledge and experience database, then your content of thinking is compromised. It's not
that's a nice example.
As it could be.
So that would be an investment of an organization into one's capacity to deal with progress. For example, to invest more in that and analysis of regular analysis of mistakes that happened. And that
For example.
Voila. And that would be an investment into a form of thinking, which, you know, they might have all the knowledge of how to go about a certain project, but the learn from mistakes is not implemented.
Exactly. So if you would find, I mean, I'm an internal auditor, if I would find during an audit that there are standard processes in place, that this kind of learning should take place, but you just find out it's basically a lip service. Nobody does it. Nothing happens with the documentation. Then you can conclude that the overall quality of thinking content is compromised.
Yeah.
Is compromised, yes.
Very nice example.
So, what was the question? Can we go back to the question?
So how would you now recommend, you know, viewers that are maybe now thinking about their own organization? So what can we do? First of all, that distinction is helpful. And what can we do now if we want to focus more on innovation?
Exactly.
You know, so what would you recommend? Again,
first thing, most important thing is strive for world-leading, actual, broad, diverse, and relevant content of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
This includes knowledge and experience, but also data. So find out if you need better data. Make sure that you get this data, that you have access to the data. Make sure you have people who can actually work with the data and get the stories out of the data. Then you can also expand your knowledge and experience within the company. So give your people training opportunities. I also know about companies who don't even tell the employees what they should train. They just say, you do some training, whatever makes sense for you. And that's a smart thing, because from an innovation perspective, you don't know which small part of a person's knowledge will be kind of the tipping point.
That will actually, develop something further. Exactly. And if the employee or the person can decide him or herself what to learn next, it's brilliant, actually. Yeah, because it kind of favors that exploration that we all kind of, you know, go about when we innovate, we explore.
Well, it certainly is intrinsic motivation of someone that's triggered when a person can choose himself or herself what she or he would like to learn. Another approach a company could use is to have something that I call permeable organizational borders. So open up your organization, go out there, talk to people outside of the company, talk to other experts, go to conferences, talk to your stakeholders, your customers, your procurers. So talk to people, get their perspective. And it's
and not basically to limit the borders of the organization.
Exactly. And in the book Superminds by MIT Professor Malone, I found this amazing statement that illustrates it pretty good. In the book, Professor Malone referred to a journalist who used the term that innovation is ideas having sex.
Ah, brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, it's a little bit, but
yes, I mean, but it's a nice comparison.
it really, in some way, the quote is really good. So it's about getting close, getting kind of deep, having a deep dive together, sharing knowledge in a relaxed atmosphere. And that's, we all know how this discussions or talks, how they feel like. It's when you have the impression that someone really, really sees you, recognizes you, values you. And in German, we use the word Sternstunde. How could we translate this, Alexandra, in English?
Like a future prediction session, I would say. Yeah, Sternstunde. It's like when you look to the stars to predict the future, I would say. So, I don't think there's a direct.
It's pretty unique when it happens, and it touches one. It's very deeply touching when this kind of discussions take place.
Exactly, and we all know that, as you say, we've all lived that kind of experience,
and that's what we need. So another way is, of course, boosting your knowledge and experience is that you bring people from your company together. That's where liberating structures and bar camps and open spaces but also, breakout rooms and coffee areas really make sense. It's about bringing people together and then letting the magic happen.
Yes, that's what you said beforehand as well. We need structures or things that stimulate actually people having those exchanges and that good conversations. May I just dive in there a bit, because I hear now the question of the viewers will be, yeah, but fair enough, all these great rooms and all these great structures. What do we do in our international companies? And we've recently, since Corona, switched to hybrid working. What do we do with our video calls? Can we have these deep conversations there as well?
In my experience, yes, it works quite well.
I would say as well.
So I've attended a virtual bar camp.
Ah, great. Yeah, great example.
Last summer. Yes, a part of the information sharing was kind of couldn't take place. So if you're really working on something very important, or you need to generate lots of ideas, then, or you discuss about how you could implement it, then I really would do it face to face.
So you would.
But as soon as you don't need these intuitive thinking forms. So intuitive thinking forms, we have two. PSI theory establishes two intuitive thinking forms, and they both use parallel processing network intelligence. So if you need this kind of thinking, bring people together. Physically, you're saying? Physically, yeah. Bring them together online in kind of a moderated process like liberating structure. But if things really get tough, bring them also together virtually, in real life. And that's interesting what you're saying, because so you would distinguish according to a form of thinking now for whether it's physical, like on-site, or hybrid, or like virtual, right? You're saying if we need intuitive type of thinking and interaction, physical on-site, and if we need other forms of thinking, it might also work virtually. That is, again, a nice example, right? How we can use forms of thinking. Exactly. And I think we've all heard about Elon Musk's email, like everybody needs to come to the office immediately. Yeah. And otherwise consider yourself fired. So I think he might confuse different thinking forms. So for very analytical and conscious thinking forms and tasks that require conscious and analytical and detail-oriented thinking, you can very well stay at home. And it's sometimes even better to be in a quiet space at home, because what I experience for that type of thinking, I need to be isolated, because the minor destruction actually pulls me out of that form of thinking. So exactly. I think certain people even need that. And analytical thinking, for example, that's characterized by emotional decoupling. So you put all your feelings away. You just do things. And if you have parallel processing, that's interesting. Let's take it again. Parallel processing at its highest form. So PSI theory calls it extension memory. That's the name of this information processing system, a form of thinking. Extension memory, you could also call it complex intuition. So this has access to a person's entire knowledge and experience. And that includes the emotions, right? That is implicit. So you don't, it's not really conscious. It's kind of super conscious. If you need access to this, bring people together. Yeah, because also there's emotional intelligence in there, right? That's what you're saying. And in the analytic phase you were describing before, we're kind of decoupled, we're focused on that one thing. That's why an isolated space might be better. Which is a nice way actually to distinguish. Yeah, and this kind of thinking form, this complex intuition, it also has an extensive connection to body awareness and the feelings. Ah, brilliant. Yeah, and there comes the physical space again. And there comes the physical space as well, again. And it's important to bring people together, because you need to put them in a certain mood, and the mood that goes along with complex intuition is a feeling of being relaxed.
Very nice. So there we have a really good tip for organizations when to decide to bring people together. It's this criteria of putting them into that relaxed mood, for having that complex intuition that includes the body awareness, right? That includes the emotions. That is so powerful.
Exactly. And then we could also talk about somatic markers. So somatic markers, this gut feel, this gut feel like there is something. Can't really
Somatic
word it
marker.
yet.
That is interesting. I haven't heard that phrase. Is that from PSI theory?
No,
as well?
That's not from PSI theory. If I remember correctly, that's Damasio. And I think he said that somatic markers, it's kind of this gut feeling like I'm scared, or there's something, or where you have the impression something is, you can almost say it, but it's somewhere still hidden. You certainly know it. And then suddenly,
and we all know it,
under the shower, during sleeping, in the morning, where you have a very relaxed mood, suddenly you know, you get it out of your brain.
Yeah,
I had this experience last night. A colleague of mine wanted to know a book, and the book isn't available anymore. So it's called Learning to Fly. It's how knowledge management has been established at British Petrol in the 90s, or the early 2000 years, so around 2004, 2005.
Okay.
And the two authors who were part of the team, they wrote a book about it, and it's not available anymore. And he said, I'd like to read it. And I said, and I couldn't find it at home. And last night I couldn't sleep. At 1 a.m, suddenly I knew one of the authors' name is Chris. 2 weeks after we talked about it. So
and it just appeared like that.
Yeah. And then I found it and could send the ISB number to this colleague.
But this example, what you just gave, that, would you not argue as well, that is also a form of intelligence, right? And to give yourself that, because you are in a relaxed state when you sleep, and that allows the brain to process information in a different way. And through that state, things can come up and can be thought again, right?
I really, really like it that you use the term, it's a form of intelligence. Yes. It's holistic thinking. And Professor Kuhl calls it also the highest computational powers that humans have. So we have PSI theory distinguishes four fundamentally different ways how humans process information. That's these thinking forms. And if do you know System 1, System 2 from Kahneman?
I've read Kahneman, but not this one, no.
So PSI theory doesn't distinguish two systems, it distinguishes 4 systems. So we have 2 types of System 1 and 2 types of System 2. And then it's also that some thinking forms are at the complex level, at the elementary level of personality, and 2 thinking forms are at the complex level. And the ones at the complex level is on one hand analytical thinking. 1 + 1 is 2. And the other thinking form is holistic thinking. And together, if they have an appreciative cooperation, together they're a winning team. But what happened is, throughout the century somehow, that we think analytical thinking is the best way of thinking, what it's not.
Yes, that is the history
and
also of science.
It's important to bring holistic thinking back to the table, back to the companies, but not, in an esoteric way, like, oh, we all feel good and we now have a good time. Not at all. This is more related to elementary intuition. Complex intuition is a beast. It's an amazing beast. It has access, as I said, it has specific functional characteristics. It is, again, parallel processing. It has access to a person's entire knowledge and experience, including the autobiographical experience.
Yes.
And
that is
so if you imagine you have here, in such a kind of thinking form, you have all your knowledge. Then analytical thinking comes. Well, can you see it? And it takes the detail out, thinks about it, and feeds it back. And that's how they cooperate. So that's one of the ways how this system is challenged by analytical, well, we call it intention memory in Germany, but analytical thinking is an important part of it. So it goes inside, takes some parts, thinks about it, and feeds back the information. And the second kind of feeder system for the information that complex intuition processes is the very conscious, detail-oriented view. That has a focus on novel things, novelties, details, things that don't really fit. So this information processing detaches a detail from its context, looks at it, and then it feeds it back like, hey, I found something that is new. Does it somehow match? Do we want to integrate it? Or do we take an informed decision not to integrate it?
And it puts it into a new context, doesn't it?
And then, then it puts it into a new context.
And that's this form of intelligence that you were describing. Just going back to the organizational level, what would you now recommend an organization? You would say the first step is to allow for that kind of intelligence, for complex intuition?
I think, so the first step is really the what. Make sure that you have world leading, that your outcome is on an ongoing basis, world leading knowledge and experience, and combine it with data. Second challenge for a company is, and that's where PSI theory is so useful, make sure that you have all 4 forms of thinking represented in your company.
Represented and allowed for as well, right? Because sometimes certain patterns of thinking or certain forms of intelligence are not even tolerated, if I may say so.
I couldn't really understand you acoustically. Can you repeat?
Yeah. So my question is, there are some companies that say, okay, for a certain department, for certain type of work, we only need analytic intelligence. So we don't even need, for example, what you said before, what you outlined, the complex intuition. What you are arguing is actually for any type of innovation to emerge, and that can be in any type of department, service, or whatever cluster you're looking at, you need all 4 types of intelligence, right?
Exactly.
That is important,
you need
right?
an ongoing change between the thinking forms, but it shouldn't, within a company, it shouldn't just happen, because humans have, and that's how personality is also defined in PSI theory, humans have preferences for specific forms of thinking. They have preferences for specific motives. There are people who are achievement oriented. There are people who are power motivated. So, and within a company, this shouldn't just happen. What I'm expecting a future viable company to do is to know on a meta level when they want to use which form of thinking.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Know the pros and the cons of it. Manage the drawbacks of this form of thinking as risks that could materialize. And ensure that an ongoing change can happen.
That's what I mean.
Sometimes, as a company, you want to have one-sided form of thinking. For example, you don't want to have an innovative controlling department.
That's
a
what I
little
mean.
bit of innovation is okay, but in general, you want serious work there. So, and this has pros and cons. So it's all about knowing where and when you need which form of thinking. And the end result of this approach, you could even call it a management approach, is organizational agency. Can the organization recruit thinking forms that fit the task at hand? And can it switch thinking forms? And
that's what I mean. Can I just dive in there? Now thinking from a general manager's point of view, if I put myself after the recruiting process, so the first step you're saying is it's important to recruit all types of intelligence. And then the next step would be, okay, what do we incentivize, or what do we just, that's what I meant before when I say allow, or, you know, what do we kind of support in the company? And I think what I learned from your, what you were saying just before is, so a general manager or somebody who wants to foster innovation should basically also say and verbalize to people that all types of intelligence are welcome, and that they can choose themselves. They, I mean, the people who work together, that they can choose themselves to certain criteria which type of intelligence they're accessing. Have I understood you correctly in that? It's that openness, right?
Well, it's knowing that the key statement, I would say, is knowing that one-sided thinking preferences are dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They represent a risk for the company.
And lead to blockage of, if we talk about innovation, and lead to maybe blockage of a certain form of innovation to emerge, right? That's...
Yes, but just in general, I mean, if you have an over analytical company, you might not be innovative anymore. Mm-hmm. If you have an overly innovative company, you might find a widespread sense of complacency across the organization, and they can't learn anymore, and they get knowledge and experience that kind of, you know, flat with low quality. And if you're too focused on detailed innovation, you might focus on learning by doing, and your strategic portfolio might include stuff that actually shouldn't be there because you were just buying things or doing a merchant acquisition because of a golf session, and you met someone who gave you the opportunity to acquire the company. So you might end up with a very strangely diversified portfolio. For example. And I think from a meta level, and that's part of assurance work, on a meta level, the company needs to know which thinking preferences are fit for purpose and ensure that you have an ongoing change in thinking preferences. And now let's go one step further. These kind of thinking preferences should also be embedded in the internal control framework of the company, in the enterprise risk management.
To avoid, on the other hand, that certain risks happen to the organization that could do damage, right?
Exactly. And I like, if you can say it this way, I like the agile methodologies. Because at the core of agile, if you go back to the agile manifesto at the ski resort, at the core is they are saying analytical thinking is good, but holistic thinking is even better. And
so leading
agile
again to that
as a
next
methodology aims at preventing one-sidedness in thinking forms by prescribing an ongoing change in thinking forms at a certain point in time.
Now, this is interesting what you're saying. That point, actually, again, I'm thinking from my general manager's perspective. In order to instill that into an organization, what can help here is, first of all, to have that awareness, right? Be aware of that. So that is where the PSI theory can help. And then secondly, what I would do now, following your elaborations about PSI theory, I would actually install regular, that could be quarterly sessions of reflecting on, hang on guys, are we actually in the preferred thinking style at the moment? Does it help us with what are we working on at the moment? What do we want to achieve? Is this our preferred style or not? Or do we need to flip? That I would install kind of sessions to reflect on that. What would you say to that suggestion?
I think that's pretty good. Yes, it's also about awareness. Awareness of thinking forms, awareness what the pros and cons of each thinking form is, and awareness that altogether they are kind of a winning team. And that's also, of course, valuable for an individual. So, and that's
Absolutely.
called self-steering competences.
That is
Whatever
powerful, yes.
preferences as an individual you have, do you manage to change thinking form?
Mm-hmm.
Do you manage to get into action even if you don't feel like it? Do you manage to learn from new experience and from failures?
Yes, or from complete different experiences sometimes as well.
Yeah. And do you manage to calm yourself when things go really rough?
Mm-hmm.
And do you manage to motivate yourself when you should get into action?
Nice
And the
examples.
same applies at the company level. And what is so fascinating about PSI theory is that this kind of thinking, the thinking forms, and also the combinations between thinking forms and motives, and topics such as self-steering and progression, regression, that this is in a very analytical way described with its functional characteristics and how it all interacts with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And all
powerful.
that I do is I take this approach. It's almost like building bricks, like playing Lego. I take this approach, this very modular approach, and apply it at the company level.
That is fascinating. So now I can hear the next question of somebody in a company saying, okay, that's great. I wanna apply that to my own organization. What do I start with? What would you say is the first small step to start with if you want to get into that perspective?
I think it's a lot about knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe reading a PSI publication. There is a publication, it's a 50-pager, an academic article from Professor Cools and two other professors about the architecture of human motivation.
Oh, great. We will link
that might be a good start. It's already very deep. It's kind of the essence of PSI theory in English, but it might be a good idea to start reading this article. And there's also the website of Impart. It's available in German and English. So Impart stands for Institute of Motivation and Personality something. So it's a spin-off of the University of Osnabrück where Professor Cool...
okay. So there to get the information. And of course, we will link all the contact details for yourself. They can get in touch with you because what you do with your think tank as well, you provide that kind of service to give that framework of thinking to organizations, right? So it could be also worthwhile just getting in touch with you and having a conversation about a concrete context. Because for me, myself, projecting what you were telling before about my own work context, it helps already just putting that new perspective on it, you know. And as you say, sometimes it's just the awareness about it that helps to take a new, fresh perspective and say, okay, maybe it's not even the content that we should worry about. Maybe we should switch how we do things here. And that is not a leadership style that I mean. You know, it's not about how we manage, it's maybe how we think. And that is really what I found excellent. You know, now we know each other for roughly a year, a little bit less than a year. And I have learned so many insightful ways of looking at the same thing from you. It's amazing. So I really start to recommend that theory as well. So it's really great.
Thank you.
Maybe as a final note, could you just say also the viewers, now we talked in depth about innovation, could you just finally also tell the viewers what other applications this theory can be used for, or this framework can be used for?
Yes. So I see it as a new management approach. What the theory can be used for is to unlock human patterns in data and information. So the approach I take is I'm not looking at individual people. I'm also not looking at teams. I look at work results. And with PSI theory, you can bring the human patterns, the thinking preferences that are embedded in the work results. You can identify them and you can assess them in a risk-oriented way. I call this human pattern analysis. And I do it with work results, but of course it can be used for other things than work results. It can be used for frameworks, to look at frameworks like COSO. It can be used to look at expert statement, expert articles of the world leading people. So to extract their statements about the thinking forms that would be fit for purpose. It can be used to look at regulations. For example, from financial regulatory authorities. And it can also be used to look at methodologies. Like my statement about Agile. Agile prevents one-sidedness in thinking by prescribing a continual change in thinking forms at a given point in time.
And this is so useful. Yeah.
If I do this human pattern analysis across all these various sources and within the company, I can start to compare and contrast the patterns.
That is
For example,
really,
within a company,
really yeah.
you can compare the thinking preferences embedded in the strategy with the recruiting strategy. Or you can look at the audit issues and compare it to the control framework. Or you can look at the financial report of a company.
I was going to say the accounting patterns, right?
Well, I don't work with numbers. I work with language.
Yes, but accounting also has at the end of the bilan, there's always a huge paragraph of how the bilan is interpreted, right? There's always the interpretation at the end, and that interpretation shows you patterns as well, how we make sense of the numbers. That's what I mean, the accounting patterns.
Exactly. So if we go back to this so what or now what question, it's a new, fascinating and science-based approach to look at human factors in companies. And it's like a new guiding methodology, how to become future viable and how to do governance, like governance, I sometimes call it governance 2.0. So a new way of governance, whereas the human factor is directly built in.
Yeah,
it can be used also as a
that.
way for internal auditors to assess conduct risk. And also there's of course also a link to culture. Culture defined as how does the company tick, independent of cognitive content or thinking content such as social norms. So how do they tick?
And what I like, what I just would like to underline in what you just said is this way of, in all this kind of effort of analysis, the overall goal is also to avoid one-sidedness. Because as we all know from the big stories of when huge successful companies kind of crashed or went downhill, it was always because a certain type of complacency set in over the years and a certain type of, oh yeah, we have always done it like that, it will work also in the future, but it didn't. And we know the case studies of these big giants that failed. And also because the product was not timely anymore. But this one-sidedness, is it not that also that we want to all avoid, that because we have been in the industry for like 20 years, we want to then say, okay, justify, no, this way of thinking is correct, but actually no, this perspective always kind of encourages us to change constantly and to say, no, just because you've done it 20, it's not a valid reason. Don't become one-sided. And that's on the individual and on the social level. And as you say, not just focused on humans, not on teams. It's also looking at what is the patterns of the output, right? It's a really nice way of looking at an organization, I find.
Exactly. And I think it's also about authenticity. I remember having read about a British company, a British racing, bicycle racing company. I think they were creating equipment, and their company company, their brand statement was, it was in Latin, ex duris gloria. So from pain comes success. And it was a beautiful statement in my view of a company that is achievement oriented. So these cyclists, they were hobby cyclists, but at a very high level. So they created the whole equipment for these people. So it said, from pain comes success, ex duris gloria. So achievement oriented, get better all the time. Try to get better all the time, and then you will be happy. Then you feel a sense of fulfillment. And that's one statement already about the company culture, and it represents a specific pattern, a concurrence-oriented achievement pattern implemented with a specific way of thinking.
That's
and
very
like
nice.
You can start as an assurance expert, but also as an executive, as a board member, as a CEO, as a CFO. You can start building the story. So it gives, working with PSI theory at the company level, gives you new insights and tells you which point you should target first to increase the overall maturity level of what I call an organizational personality.
That is wonderful. Wow, that is a perfect ending note. Barbara, thank you so much. No, seriously, I have learned so much, and I guess the viewers as well, because I think we have gotten a glimpse today in how powerful this theory is. I will put all the contact details of you, because I think lots of people might get really interested now. It is something, as you said, a powerful management style, a powerful perspective, and it helps us to become more aware of our own patterns of thinking. Thank you so much, dear Barbara, for this wonderful interview.
You're most welcome. My pleasure, Alexandra. Thank you.